Could just talk loud. We're on. Okay.
Test.
We'll go ahead and call the special budget meeting to order for January 24th. Charlene, could we have a roll call, please?
Definitely. Peterson. Here. Weifenbach. Here. Davis. Here. Hadcock. Kroger.
Here.
Costello.
Here.
Quaker.
Here.
Waugh.
Here.
Brown.
Here.
Mason.
Here.
We have quorum.
Okay, we do have a quorum. First item on the agenda this evening is going to be presentations by the mayor. Mayor Hanks.
We'll see if I can do it from down here. First of all, I wanted to give you just a little bit of an update as far as where we're at. Now, keep in mind that we do not have the final numbers for 2010. As I've mentioned on numerous occasions, we won't have those numbers until sometime mid-February. So about another 2 or 3 weeks, and we can basically have an idea of exactly where we were. But we have a pretty good idea of how we ended up in 2010 based upon, there again, projections and so forth. And I just want to go through and there again, be happy to forward this, a copy of this to everyone via email. We'll also go ahead and put it up on the website. Sales tax. That's one of the things that we always, of course, track. And there again, you've seen this chart many, many times. Going back to 2008 as far as the actual and the projected, 2009 projected and actual, and then also 2010 projected and the 2011 projected. Thing I always point out is the 2011 projected is the exact same number as the 2009 actual. If you remember when we were having the discussion about the 2011 budget, we wanted to be just absolutely as conservative as we could be, so we went back to the 2009 actual number, and that's the number we used. And of course, keep in mind 2009 was probably the worst year as far as impact by the recession on Rapid City. So that's why we used basically the most conservative numbers we could come up with. So anyway, that I just want to make sure you looked at that. As far as sales tax year to date, if you notice the far right column is 2010. Do we have an echo? Charlene, can you go see if maybe possibly my office is turned on? Hello? Hello? Yeah. There we go. Hearing it somewhere. That's all right. Let me go on. Do you guys hear that? Okay. I thought it might be jet lag or something. 2010, as you can see, we actually have the numbers all the way through the end of November. And based upon that, we are up 3.2% over the 2009 numbers. Now, there again, if you look at 2009, the 3.33%, that is actually through the end of November, not through the end of the year. We actually ended up down about 3.2%. So we're certainly trending in the right direction. There again, one of the things we like to do is we want to track sales tax as far as comparing it month to month on a cash basis. And as you can see, in the beginning of 2010, we actually ended up, we started almost 4% in the hole compared to 2009. That really worried us. But as we started getting into February and March, we saw a trend that showed improvement in our sales tax revenue. And by the time we hit March, April, we were actually above. And you can actually see the trend line continues to go up. And currently, through the end of November, we're at 3.21% above 2009. And I'm crossing my finger, and you've probably heard me say this, I'm really hopeful that we're going to get to 3.5%. And the reason I say that is, if we get to 3.5%, our city employees get a raise. That's what the contract says. They need to get 3.5%, then they'll get a 0.75% raise as of July 1st. So I think we all cross our fingers. It does two things. First of all, it will allow our city employees to get a raise, and the other thing is it demonstrates that we're continuing to grow our way out of the recession. So we should have those numbers hopefully there again in about 2 or 3 weeks. And as soon as we have that, of course, we'll forward that to you. There again, triple B tax. Keep in mind, we don't have the actuals for the end of the year because it is the same collection as our sales tax. And so we have 11 months worth, but we don't have December's yet. There again, I always throw this chart up so you actually have an idea of what the actual for 2007, 2008, The projected for 2009 and the actual for 2009, as you can see, we've done very well. The 2010 projected was a little over $3 million, and there again, the projected for 2011 was just about the same dollar amount, a little over $3 million. Here's what we can tell you as far as year-to-date. Keep in mind, if you look at the far right-hand column, you'll see that the December numbers are not in there. But based upon the numbers we have, January through the end of November, we're up 3.73%. So we're right on track. Actually, we're going to have a very good year. I tell you, I've been absolutely amazed. If you've noticed, we didn't have a dip in the triple B like we did in the sales tax. You notice that? In 2009, it didn't take a dip. If anything, look at it. It was almost 5%. That's one of the things that I think that we're very fortunate about in Rapid City and actually the Black Hills communities is the fact that when it comes to our economy, there's different sectors that have survived the recession a lot better than anywhere else in the country. You know, obviously ag prices have been good. Ag is number one as far as industries in our state, always has been, probably always will be. But there's been very good cattle prices, there have been very good crop prices. Tourism, we had a very good tourism in 2009 and in 2010, so that has helped us through that recession. And of course, the retail sector and also the medical sector have all been good. And so even through the worst of the recession, we continue to see big box stores coming to Rapid City. That, I'll tell you, if you ever want an indicator that there's a belief that our economy will continue to do well, you look at the big boxes because, you know, they're looking at every market in the country and they're trying to figure out where they want to go based upon their projections. So that's a pretty good indicator. So there again, through the first 11 months of the year, our triple B tax is up about 3.75%. So that's very good. There again, we track the triple B just like we do the sales tax, trying to get an idea as far as where it's trending. You always hear me say, never try to focus on 1 month. And the reason for that is you can see we took a dip in March. Well, a lot of that is the reporting, really where the reporting dates fall in. And a lot of times you'll get these peaks and valleys, but really what you need to look at is the overall trend. And there again, you can see that we started off pretty good in January. It dipped in March, and then it trended right back up. And there again, now this is the bid, the pillow tax, the $2 per night per room. Now this isn't going to fluctuate a whole lot like the sales tax or the triple B because there again, it's a unit tax. You only have a certain amount of rooms, and so one of two things either have to happen if we're going to see a large increase. Either you have to get more rooms in inventory, or the occupancy rate, the percentage of rooms rented every night, has to go up. Well, the problem we've been running into is, especially over the summer months, the rooms, they've been sold out. And so you're not going to see a big peak, but what I will tell you is the fact that it continues to trend up. Whoops. As a matter of fact, we expect to have another very good year. There again, about 2%, I believe, is what that's trending up. Is that, Pauline? We don't have it up there, but I believe it's up about 2%, which is sort of typical. You know, there again, the only way it's going to increase, either more rooms or higher occupancy. But the problem is when you have certain nights of the year where you're sold solid, you can't increase it no matter what you do. But there again, we're very happy with the bid taxes. Building permits for 2010. Now, we do have year-end numbers here because of the fact we track these internally and we don't have to wait for the Department of Revenue to get back to us. This is the total value of building permits, and if you look at 2010, it was just shy of $133 million. It was quite an improvement over 2009, but it's still below where we really want to be. If you look traditionally, say 2002 through 2005, 2006, we really should be closer to $140 to $150 million. Now, 2007 was really the outlier at $212 million. That was an absolutely incredible year. That was Rushmore Crossing, that was Cabela's, that was a lot of other big projects. But typically, a good year for us, we should be in the $140 to $150 million. We're not quite there yet. We're hoping that 2011 is going to continue to trend to be a very good year. Residential permits. This surprises us a little bit because of the fact that, now there again, if you look back to 2000, use that sort of as a benchmark, we're at $20 million. 2001 was 30 and then went to 56, 56, 76, and we were actually in the 60s for quite a few years. And then, of course, when the bottom dropped out in 2008 and 2009, it dropped basically around 30 million. And in 2010, we were at almost $34 million. So it's starting to pick back up. Part of the problem we ran into, especially in 2008, 2009, is there were a lot of, and I'm going to look to Ron Kroger, and he can probably correct me if I'm wrong, but there was a lot of inventory of brand new homes on the market, a lot of spec homes on the market, and it took a while for the market to actually absorb those that were out there in inventory. Now we're to a point where there's not that many spec homes on the market at this time. There's still some, but you're not seeing the builders going out doing a lot of spec homes. They're doing custom homes, which means they're already pre-sold. But as far as the spec homes, they're not going out and speculating that they can sell those homes for a couple reasons. Number one, they don't want to go out on a ledge, and the other thing is the banks aren't loaning money on spec homes right now. So anyway, so we were encouraged that residential building permits are on their way back up. Commercial, there again, is a little bit softer. There again, this is actually the number of units, not the dollar amount, but the number of units for new residential building permits. If you can see in 2010, we're up about 24-25% over 2009. Now, you know, that's good. It's not great because we're still below where we were in 2007, again, which was a record year, but we're trending up. In 2008, we were at 211. 2009 was 155, which there again, that was really the worst of the recession, and we trended back up to 192. Now keep in mind, these are residential permits within the corporate limits of Rapid City. We continue to see residential development just outside our borders, whether it be out on Sharon Lake Road or Exit 61. So there is residential units being built, whether it's single family, whether it's townhomes, whether it's apartments. We continue to see, I don't want to call it a strong market, but at least a reasonable, steady market as far as units being built. This is a very important slide. One of the questions, especially when we got into the third quarter, I know some council members had some concerns. We're exactly where we at as far as what was budgeted versus what we have spent. Now there again, these numbers are real close. I don't know if matter of fact, I think, Pauline, we can pretty much say these are finalized numbers. They may change just a little bit, but they should be pretty much finalized, shouldn't they? On a cash basis, they should be. If you remember, the budget for 2010 without supplementals, in other words, this was the original budget. Now, the thing I need to point out to you, because you may say, well, the original budget was actually $50 million. We're looking at something without interdepartmental charges. In other words, this is without the interdepartmental charges, was $45,086,000. That's what we actually approved the budget for 2010. The expenses were $42,831,000, call it $43 million. So the difference was $2.2 million is what came back to the city of Rapid City as far as unencumbered cash. Money that was budgeted but not spent was 2.2. Now here's the interesting thing, and we just double checked on this. The dollar amount that we were anticipating that we could use from the unencumbered cash in 2010 to balance our budget, because in the past what we've always done is we've always counted on a certain percentage of money not being spent in that fiscal year that we can carry forward to the next fiscal year, $2.2 million. Now, so needless to say, we covered all of our expenses. Now this is without supplementals. This is the number we really need to take a look at. Budgeted including supplementals. Now supplementals can mean a lot of different things. Keep in mind, it can be a plus or it can be a minus, but typically it is funds that we get through other funding sources. It can be federal grants, it can be different programs that come in, but it's money that we actually add or supplement into our budget. Was 40, there again, this is without interdepartmental charges, $47 million. What we actually spent was the same dollar amount, $42 million, almost 43, right? So the difference is the money that we did not spend that was actually budgeted, including the supplementals, was $4.2 million. Now remember, I told you we needed $2.2 million to balance the budget. That's what we were counting on. We actually got $4.2 million back. So I will tell you, we should consider ourselves extraordinarily fortunate. You probably all heard I just came back from Washington, D.C., had the opportunity to speak to over 200 mayors from across the country, and I will tell you I was almost embarrassed when I had to explain to them that our unemployment rate was 4.5%, and we didn't have to have any layoffs, and the worst the recession got for us is we were down about 3.2% in 2009. They couldn't believe it, quite honestly. I was talking with mayors I mean, as small as, I think there was a very small community of about 5,000, somewhere just outside of Chicago, to the mayor of Chicago, the mayor of New Jersey, the mayor of Tucson, the mayor of Los Angeles, Des Moines. I mean, it was absolutely amazing that we continued to hear the same thing from across the board from these mayors, is the fact that they were in the middle of trying to figure out how to balance their budget, because typically they were off double digits. You know, they were off 10, 15%. They've already laid employees off. Their unemployment rate was typically 8, 9%. There was a few that were in the 6s and 7s. But as far as I can tell, no one else was basically at 4.5%. We're currently at 4.6 is the last number I saw. And so we are the envy. And when I say we, the upper Midwest, because it isn't just Rapid City, it's really the upper Midwest. Sioux Falls is in pretty good shape. Bismarck is in pretty good shape. And actually, quite honestly, Bismarck, who wasn't there, was probably in better shape than we are because of all the energy revenue coming in from the Bakken oil fields. And so what I continue to hear from the mayors was there was a concern that they were going to have to come up with additional layoffs of employees, additional cuts in services. And all I can say is that Rapid City is very blessed, because with the council's help and with the council's leadership, we approved a budget that included no layoffs, no city employee lost their jobs. We did not cut any services at all. And on top of that, we managed to balance the budget without dipping into reserves. And actually, we did and there again, this credit goes to the department directors. They squeezed the pennies very hard. I told you that they would do that, and they absolutely did, to the tune of about $4.2 million, which was budgeted, that was not spent. So going into 2011, I'm not going to say it's rosy, but I'm going to tell you that fiscally, we're sound. We're in good shape. Now, the other number I want to throw out, if you remember, in 2010, we needed $2.2 million of basically unencumbered cash. In other words, money that wasn't spent from 2009. We needed that for 2010. So it was 2.2. So then the question during our budget hearings was, well, how much are we depending on our budget in 2010 for the 2011 budget, the unencumbered cash, right? Because there was a lot of concern with that. There again, with a lot of hard work from department heads and also the city council, it's $428,000. If you notice, we're depending less and less on the unencumbered cash that was spent in the previous fiscal year. And that is the goal. And we've been working that way for almost 4 years now. And my goal is within the next year or two, we're going to get down to zero. We shouldn't have to depend on it at all. I would love to get to that point. And we're getting very close. And I think we're just about to the end. With that, I would stand by for questions.
Any questions for Mayor Hanks?
There again, please keep in mind, if you have any questions about, we will forward this presentation to you. We'll also put it up on the website. But if you have any questions, either for myself or for Pauline or for Tracy, just you can either contact my office or contact them directly, and we'd be happy to try and come up with the answers that you're looking for.
Thank you, Mayor. Any questions for the mayor? Sam, go ahead.
Thank you. My question is regarding the transition of items from the general fund to enterprise funds. We moved the energy plant. For example, we moved the energy plant was moved from Public Works to the Civic Center, and that took effect when?
November, but it didn't change its status versus general fund versus enterprise. We just moved it from one department to another.
Well, the Civic Center is an enterprise fund.
Right, but as far as how it was actually funded, go ahead, Pauline.
Actually, the energy plant was always its own fund. It was never funded under the general fund. So that's always had a separate fund that we've tracked the monies on.
So it was never counted as part of the general fund?
No, it was not.
It was all on its own?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
So it always was an enterprise fund?
Yes. It was just who was overseeing the department or
The organizational structure.
Correct.
Yep.
Okay. Do we have P&L statements or income statements available for all of the enterprise funds?
The most recent completed financial statements are from the 2009 audit. There should be, in the audit, there is a income statement for each individual enterprise fund, as well as all of the funds, actually.
And as far as the 2010, those will be available once the audit is completed?
We could have preliminary ones done, as we have to start working on those, but the actual, where it's been adjusted and that type of thing, the most recent are at the end of 2009.
We do, one more follow-up, but we do preliminary financials on a quarterly or monthly basis, don't we?
We balance the cash each month. We have what's a CR report, cash receipts report, and we also have the GL paid report, and also just the normal GL report. Most of those are on a cash basis. Our financial statements are on a modified accrual basis, and so they will differ. And so we do have a cash report done, but if there's any adjustments that need to be made, those have not been done until we do the accrual, the modified accrual basis.
And the cash is on a monthly basis?
Correct.
Thank you.
Mayor Haynes.
Thank you, Mr. President. One thing I forgot to mention, and that is the fact that we went back and looked, and we'll start producing some of those reports once the numbers are finalized. But at this point, it does not appear that any one of the 11 different departments actually went over their budgets. In other words, everyone lived within their budgets. No one had to come back and actually exceeded what was budgeted to them. So there again, a lot of the credit has to go back to the department directors. They were specifically told to pinch the pennies. Now, and if I can, Mr. President, the other thing, and I know that there were some concerns in the fiscal 2011 budget as far as doing lease purchases on the equipment if we need be. As I mentioned during the budgetary process, if we can start growing our way out of the recession, which appears that we are, we may have the opportunity to go back and supplement items back into the budget, including the equipment purchases, and not have to do that lease purchase. I'm crossing my fingers. I think we're going to get there. That would certainly be our goal. But, you know, there were certain things that we did to make sure that we balanced the budget based upon the projections that we had, quite honestly, almost 6 months ago, actually almost 7 months ago. And there again, we were extraordinarily conservative on the revenue projection side. We have realized quite a bit more than what we were projecting. Matter of fact, let me explain this. Going into fiscal year 2011, the dollar amount that we used for sales tax was unadjusted. It was our 2009 number. It's what it was. Now, having said that, that was based in 2009. In 2010, we're going to be up about 3.2. We're hoping that, there again, cross your fingers, 3.5%, which means that we're growing out, plus our employees get a raise, right? And then any increase that we get in the fiscal year 2011, and for the sake of discussion, let's say that it's a mirror. So we get, in 2010, we had an increase in sales tax revenue of 3.5%. In 2011, we have an increase of 3.5%, right? What's that mean at the end of the fiscal 2011 year? That means that our revenue projections as far as sales tax are going to be up approximately 7% over what we projected. We flatlined it. We didn't include any increases. And if we have any increase that is accumulated in 2010, and if can be added to that equation, and if we also have an increase in sales tax revenue in 2011, you add those together, and there again, if we do as well in 2011 as we did in 2010, our sales tax revenue will be 7% above what we projected.
Any other questions for the mayor? Bonnie?
I just wanted to thank you for all your work, and it's very optimistic to think we'd have, that's great. But I think that we need to be very cautious because this too could be kind of a little blip, and it could reverse itself because.
No question about it.
And so I just think we need to be very conservative here with the people's money till we know we've got some cash. Thanks.
Mayor?
There again, we're on a cash basis. There again, any adjustments as far as looking at putting some of those purchases as far as equipment back in, my suggestion is that we don't even take a look at that until we get into the third quarter. Let's get a half a year under our belt, see where we're at, and then if indeed the revenue is there and we continue to see that upward trend, then we can take a look at going back and making adjustments to the fiscal year 2011. At this point, my recommendation to the council is don't make any changes. And the reason for that is, Bonnie, you're exactly right. What happens if it turns the other direction and say that by the end of the year, we're actually 3.5% in the hole? Well, fortunately, there again, that means we're break even because we have a 3.5% increase in 10, which is offset by the 3.5% decrease in 11. So as far as our budget, we're fine. We can't go back out and do some of the things that we'd like to do. In other words, purchase some equipment and pay cash instead of doing a lease purchase. And going out and, where's Robert Ellis? Buying some sand, which Donnie Brumbaugh, if you remember, buying sand and salt. We sort of held the line, trying to do a balancing act, and they said, well, it's cheap right now. Let's go out and buy another $500,000. We didn't do that, and just because of the fact that we needed to watch our cash flow. So,
Anything else, Bonnie?
No, thank you.
Jordan?
Yes, and thank you for the presentation. A lot of really good information. I did have a question on one item specifically for the 2010 without supplemental and then with the supplemental. It came to $47,032,598. Is that roughly correct?
I'm going to have Dave put that back up on the screen. And let me just back up. There we go. So the two numbers, the $45 million is the budget that was actually approved at the beginning of the year without any supplementals. Okay? That's $45,086,000. Okay? Then the $47 million is really the budget at the end of the year after we actually approved all the supplementals. So we actually added additional revenue and expenses into the budget as we went through the year. And so the actual budget as adjusted at the end of the year, including the supplemental, was $47 million. Now the expenses didn't change because what we spent is what we spent. And that's that $43 million. And there again, the number, which is really good news, the number to look at is the $4.2 million. That is the unencumbered cash that came back to the city of Rapid City.
Right. I guess my question pertains kind of looking at this in the context, and this is out of the 2010 budgeted amount at $148 million, I'm assuming, for the
you're talking about the total budget.
Total. Mm-hmm. So that leaves about $98 million for the enterprise fund. So the majority of this fund would have been enterprise fund, correct?
Yeah. Yes.
Okay. I just wanted to clarify that. My other question actually pertains with this budget. Looking back and actually tracking it over a period of about 5 to a 6 year period track, I've noticed that our debt is increasing from 2008 to 2009. I was wondering if we had a steady balance of where our debt is, overall debt.
And I think I'm going to answer this very generically, but I can tell you the reason that our debt has gone up in the last couple of years is mainly because of the water treatment plant. We went out for a big bond issuance in 2009 for almost $40 million, $45 million. And that's really what drove that up. Without that, the actual amount of debt we would have actually have within the city actually would have gone down. The other thing, and I'm happy to get this number, the reason we didn't include it on the slides is it looks really strange, and that was this slide, except looking at the total budget, because if you remember, we actually had a $163 million total budget. That is general fund and enterprise funds. It was $163 million. Then there again, you supplement in a couple $1 million, we're about $165, $166 million. The dollar amount that we actually spent, because some of the projects didn't move forward quite as fast, I think was only around $100 million. She'll look it up. And that's why it's very difficult to look at the total budget, because it includes all those capital expenditures, all those capital projects that they may have or they may not have moved forward in the same year that they were budgeted. So it's very difficult to get an idea of what's happening with that total budget other than looking at the trend. Because I will tell you, going into 2012, when we actually do that budget, you will see a number quite a bit lower than the 2011 fiscal year. We were at $163 million. You're not going to see that in 2012. And the reason is we don't have another water treatment plant to build. Now, that'll be 12. In 13, it'll jump back up. And the reason I say that is that's when we'll probably look at building the second water treatment plant at Jackson, or actually at Mountain View. And if you thought the first one was expensive, the second one's a lot more, because the second one's about $80 million. And so you're going to see the total budget basically peak, then valley, then peak, and then up and down based upon really which projects were awarded in what year. Do you have the dollar amount?
The total budget after all the supplements on all funds was $193,500,000, and what was actually spent was just shy of $133 million.
Yeah.
So that was almost $60,600,000 not spent.
And
Total.
almost all of that is construction money.
Thank you. Very informative.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
Sandwiches.
Okay, we'll move on. Next item on the agenda is the budget discussion items. You have one.
I just wanted to say something. Thank you. I just wanted to thank everybody, the council and the mayor, for putting this together. I've been on the council 3 years, and as you noticed, the last budget cycle we went through, everybody said, we squeezed it down at the last minute. Now we're having conversations ahead of the curve. So I appreciate everybody's help on that, and so moving forward, I think that this is the way that you actually should operate. Thank you.
Thank you, Ron. Okay, we have two sheets here. One was the budget discussion items that were brought forward during the budget discussions last year. And then the other sheet is a spreadsheet that Dave Davis put together and sent everybody an email, I guess, yesterday. I wasn't able to open it, so Dave, I don't know if you want to make a few comments regarding this. Then we'll...
Thank you, Mr. President. Basically, the premise as I was going over this the second or third time, I kept feeling I was hitting the same point, the same information again and again. And as I looked down through the list, if we took them in the order in which we placed them on the list, I could see that if we covered a portion of it tonight and a portion of it next month and a portion of it the month after, quite frankly, we were going to hit those items that had similarities, almost redundancies, every month. And I find it, number one, very difficult to bring closure when we regurgitate it every month. And secondly, it really didn't seem like the best use of time. So I simply threw together a quick spreadsheet that lists all the items that are on our agenda. And then I basically took some basic categories: expense, income, debt, staff, operations, and administration, and then tried to categorize them and really left them open to each of our interpretations as to which category they should go in. Because we may think differently. That 5% across the board cuts, I put under expense. Somebody else might put it under staff or operation because it's going to have an impact. Or maybe you put it under all three. The point being is, I think it allows us to break this long list down into some categories, into groupings that we could say, okay, tonight we shall deal with group 2 or group 5. I don't care which order. I don't have an agenda here. I'm just trying to make the best use of our time, that we get in, we get the job done, and we bring closure to the items so that next month we can take the next category and clean it up as well. That was the purpose of it. So what we have to do to mechanically get it in line, I'm not sure, but that's the direction in which I was going. Thank you.
So your thought process is we'd go through these discussion items, we'd start basically on expenses, take all the ones that are marked under expense, go through them. Is that what you're...
Not necessarily. Maybe if people want to take operations first. Once again,
whichever one we take, but we want to then go through
exactly
each category.
Exactly. Get on a category, finish the category, and then move on to the next one, bring closure, and go on.
Is there anybody have any preference? I don't really care how we do it. We got a number of items here on both. They're the same on both sheets. I guess I really don't care how we go after it. If we go one by one as they were brought forward, or we divide them up into a spreadsheet. So what's the wish? Want to go with Dave's?
Let's do it Dave's way.
Follow the spreadsheet? Okay. So if we follow the spreadsheet, then we'll let Mr. Davis pick which category he'd like to start out with. Sam, okay, Sam didn't get a copy of it?
Oh, sorry, Sam.
There's a whole pile.
Anyone else? Oh. We purposely didn't give you one, Jordan. Let's see. Nope, that's not.
Mr. Davis, which category would you like to
Well,
start?
actually, I think before we choose a category, probably to give everybody an opportunity to look at all of the list and the categories, because, once again, this was just
You got one, Sam?
Sam have it? I'll go
a
make
quick
it up.
opportunity for me to plug categories in that they may fit in different categories in someone else's mind. I'd like to make sure that the whole council had some input, because it may be that you want to say, hey, let's take item number 9 and plug it into another category as well.
Ron?
I just want to make one comment before we start, and so I don't waste anybody's time. If somebody in this room thinks that any kind of cut, whether it's $50,000, $60,000, may be insignificant at this time, I'd just like to know that ahead of time. So when we talk about some of these cuts or some of these, whatever the case may be, I think that would be appropriate. Or if we have a full discussion on these items, I just appreciate that. I mean, things add up over a period of time, and you know, things change, technology changes, those types of things. So I don't want to be the messenger of something and have my head cut off. I mean, I just simply don't want to go down that road. So I want to make that comment up front. Thank you.
So what we're looking for is if any council members want to switch categories with any of these items.
You'll notice some of the categories some of the items are on more than one category.
Correct.
So same thing. If somebody wants to kick another one in, just say something.
Jordan?
As I've emailed Alderman Davis earlier, I'm fine with the list, and I would rather, my idea would be to take the big bulk of these, and I notice he has a total number of discussion items by category count, and maybe start with the largest and go down sequentially to the least.
I'm fine with that.
Okay. Does anybody want to take time to look at these categories and move them around, or should we just start on what Mr. Davis
Let's just start.
gave us?
I think otherwise we'll spend all night moving them around.
That's what we'll do. We'll take expenses first. First item to discuss is a 5% across the board cut in all general fund, I would assume it is, subsidy funds except those under contract. Jordan, I think were you the one that brought this one up, but no? Discussion on that item. Anybody want to discuss that item? Pauline?
Based on the spreadsheet that was prepared, and when you add back in the management fee at the DOL, which is not under contract, the 5% dollar amount would be $57,865 in total. $57,865. That's 5% of those subsidies not under contract.
Ron?
What is the total subsidies? Under contract, not under contract?
I only have the subsidies not under contract in front of me.
That's fine.
And that total amount is $1,157,300.
Bonnie?
I wanted to bring up a point that I have concerns about what's listed under subsidies and what's listed as enterprise funds, with the DOL and the Journey being listed as subsidies, and why aren't they listed like as an enterprise fund since it's a city department? And what? It's not a city department? How does it different though from other
Pauline?
subsidies?
In the case of the DOL and the Journey Museum, they are city-owned facilities. So we have a written contract with the DAL to pay for maintenance on that facility. Is there anything else that we pay under contract? And then for that is, management fee is not under the contract that we are currently working under. So, but then for the Journey, we do not have a written contract on their subsidy allocation. But again, because of it being a city-owned facility, we make sure that we pay the maintenance charges on that facility and insurances also, I forgot that, and utilities for the Journey. And then whatever is left over after we pay all that becomes a management fee to the Journey Museum Alliance, is what it's actually called, that they operate the facility for us.
Are there other city-owned subsidies?
Not similar to these situations, no. We do have some other city facilities such as Storybook Island and Youth and Family Services that it's our building. We cover insurance costs out of our insurance, but then we bill them for reimbursement. And then YFS also pays us, I believe it's $1 per year per building as a lease for their facilities.
Well, one reason I have concerns about them being lumped in with all subsidies is because, one, they're in city buildings, and they're trying to make themselves profitable. And I just think they should be treated or put in a different category instead of lumped in subsidies, because reality is we give money to the enterprise funds. So why do we, give money to lots of groups, and yet we call them different things? One's an enterprise fund and one's a city-owned subsidy. So, wouldn't they all be city-owned subsidy in reality?
Pauline, before you answer that
Okay.
for Bonnie, I think, number one, we've basically approved the budget the end of September. And I guess my biggest question is what are we going into the reserves or undesignated funds to fund that budget?
For 2011?
For 2011, do you have that type?
Yeah, I believe it's right around $400,000.
Around $400,000.
Is what we want. 427, Tracy tells me.
How much?
$427,000.
Okay. So I guess the question I would have is are we as a council looking to eliminate that, what we're taking out of reserves, to truly have a balanced budget without going into the reserve? I mean, what is our goal that we're looking into it? Or unencumbered cash, whichever one, yeah.
Technically unencumbered cash is what we use to budget.
Or are we just trying to cut, just to clarify so we kind of know where we're going, I guess. Ron?
You want my reasoning?
Sure.
My reason is more philosophical and policy orientated.
Okay.
To realize, it's been mentioned since I've been here, and I'll use this cliche: building the old farmhouse and putting on the shingles. And it's time to look underneath the shingles or remove the shingles. And a question I would probably have in subsidy is philosophically or policy-wise: do we have a policy established, or do we have any philosophy established, or is it just a hit and miss? The period of time that I've been here for 3.5 years, it seems to be more of a political hit and miss. There's no real, philosophy. There's real no policy. And what happens is then it basically gets shifted, such as we talked about Jackson Springs tonight, because of what I think of as, I don't know how to put this without breaking somebody's heart, but saying maybe not irresponsibility at that level, but some level of not living up to accountability, that things get shifted down the road like a golf ball coming down a garden hose, basically, into future councils. There's been talk about leases and those types of things, and I appreciate the mayor's response to some of that. But philosophically, I disagree with how that budget was set up. That's a different point. But anytime you do these things, you're shifting responsibility down the road. So we politically, we say, and not picking on anybody, any in particular subsidy, but you say, listen, we'll build this building or whatever, and it's your building. At what point do we just say, you know what, this is your gig. If it doesn't work, time's up, because the taxpayers are paying for it. And we have roads in my neighborhood that have been on a list for years. I can't drive down my neighborhood without putting my seatbelt on really tight. And I'm saying there's opportunity. We've made some campaigns to move forward with some different monies and those types of things. I'm not going to get into that, but this to me is a philosophical, how do we do business going, today as a council without burdening councils in the future. We had to make tough decisions on Jackson Springs because for the last 20 years, nobody wanted to raise a dime on fees to the water payers. And now this council had to make huge, or it was a year or two ago, we had to make huge increases to the customers, just taking a baseball bat and whacking them in the side of the head saying, you know what, we're going to pay for what wasn't done in the past. And it can go the opposite way too. And we talk about insignificancies of cutting $50,000, $60,000 here and there. To me, those are more or less maybe turn into be reapportionments of moving money from one position to another position where it could be better spent or better used. And looking around the table, most of us have been involved in some sort of businesses ourselves and understand that as technology changes, times changes, you shift monies. Your business may be different today than it was 10 years ago. And that's where I think philosophically we are. And when you talk about subsidies, at some point, when you just say, listen, this isn't working for the taxpayers anymore. Is there a better way that this can be handled? And sometimes the only way to do that is to bring those people to the table and say, we've made a policy change or a philosophical change that we're no longer going to go in this area. But to do it overnight or in one day or 1 week, we were under the gun at the budget time, probably is irresponsible. But it is also, on the same effect, not living up to our responsibility to push it down to another council and say, yeah, we talked about that, but there was no political will to change anything or those types of avenues. So that's why I'm here today, and that's why having these conversations to me is important, not just to do business as usual, not to do business as we've done in the past. So probably more than you wanted.
No, that's right, Jordan. I was just trying to figure out what are we exactly, is there a point we're striving to get to, or are we just trying to cut inefficiencies or whatever it might be?
In a nutshell, Mr. Kroger, to me, it's just looking at things and seeing how we can get better at what we do.
Okay.
I guess I appreciate the comments, and I agree most wholeheartedly that a lot of this also does come down to philosophical and policy outlooks. But after analyzing, the budget over a period of time and really looking at this, and as the mayor noted, we will be looking at some further restorations in 2013 and looking forward. And I guess the numbers that I'm looking at the total combined budget in 2008 at $127 million, and then fast forward to, and then also in 2009 we have a $127 million budget. But in 2010 we jumped up to $148 million, and then in 2011 we're allocated or budgeted about $163. What my interest is that from 2008 to 2009, we went from a $94 million debt, overall debt, according to the Comprehensive Annual Financial Report, to 2009, we had $144 million debt. And if you subtract the Jackson Springs Water Treatment Plant, that still puts us $99.8 million. So we're still at about a $5.6 million increase. The reality is that Jackson Springs Water Treatment Plant did happen, that is accrued to our debt for long term. And if we are looking at an $80 million increase at 2013, let's say we pay off $20-30 million off that, we're still increasing our debt pretty significantly. So I guess I'm thinking long term here. I'm thinking far past the next 5 years, but some of these trends, and going back to trends like the mayor's presentation was excellent because I think it did do a good example of showing some of the trends. And there's some of those that I just feel like the reason that we're in a good situation today, I believe, is because we had councils before us that kept an eye on it. And I think it's important that we continue to keep an eye on it as some of the major infrastructural needs of this city are coming to fruition, and we're going to have to meet those. So I think it is a worthwhile cause to think long-term, something that a lot of people have been criticized in, especially in the political realm in this country of ours, is being short-sighted or myopic, and I don't want to be that. I want to think long-term. I want to think about long-term solutions, and I think it's important that we look at that. So I guess a lot of this I would like to think about, if we're going to need $80 million in 2013, where are we at, and how can we structure and look forward to that along with in the coming year? How can we restructure to make sure that, is it possible we could set aside funds for future expenditures? Thank you.
Thank you. Mayor?
Thank you. An awful lot of good points have been brought up, and let me just chime in and state the obvious, is the fact that one of the reasons that we're having to go out and do major capital projects right now, specifically with the water, is because of the fact that we kicked the can down the road over the last 10, 20 years. There's no questions about that. This council, most of you were on the council at the time, there's a few of you that weren't, but had to make a very tough decision as far as increasing water rates to an uncomfortable level. Now, having said that, we're still about average as far as if you look at the communities across the upper Midwest. We're basically fall somewhere in the middle as far as the actual average monthly bill. But prior to that, the citizens of Rapid City enjoyed actually a low bill. And what was happening, and quite honestly, I was on the council at the time, and Ron and Sam, and I think who else was, maybe even Bill might have been at the time, we agonized over small increases in water rates. And we finally went out. We actually had a ad hoc task force that went out, came back with recommendations, and came up with a proposal of how we were to replace basically the existing water treatment plant and to build the new Jackson Springs. The rate structure that is in place will cover the cost of building both of those. Now, there is a couple, where's Robert? Keep in mind, there's been a series of rate increases over the last couple of years, and that was all specifically designed to cover the cost of construction. We're talking about when the ad hoc committee, the water task force went out, they came back with a recommendation on how to fund it. That was the rate increases that were put in place 3 years ago, almost 3.5 years ago. And so, fortunately, the council at the time made the hard decision of how to fund it, so that's already in place. The process is moving forward. And so, the other thing, just a reminder to the council, I will tell you, Alderman Weifenbach was exactly right as far as the quality of some of our residential streets. We need to do something about it. There's no question about that. If you remember, about 3 or 4 months ago, with the council's support, we are actually going out and we're going to use .16 money, and the council has already approved this, and as a matter of fact, Robert will be coming back within a month or two with a report as far as the streets that are going to be first rehabbed as far as the residential street reconstruction program, which will put $15 million of additional money into street repair and just asphalt streets. We're not talking about the main thoroughfares, not the main lines. This is residential streets over the next 10 years. That's in addition to the $500,000 that we already have in place. So we're going to increase the amount of maintenance and construction on those residential streets by 75%.
Yeah, 70% of all the residential streets in Rapid City over that 10-year period will get some type of rehabilitation.
Now, there again, the reality of it is how did we get to this point? We've been kicking the can down the road, and I've said this publicly, we have focused so heavily on extending infrastructure for development over the last 10 years, we've let our residential streets, the quality of our residential streets, slip somewhat. This council has already made that correction. Within the next couple of months, you're going to see a lot of cone zones in residential neighborhoods. So absolutely, we're addressing it. And as far as when it comes to subsidies, that really is a policy decision. It really is. You know, keep in mind, typically in any municipality, there are certain functions that a government does that the citizens, the constituents want, that typically doesn't cash flow. And I'm going to use a good example, and that is our parks. You can, matter of fact, I'll even focus down a little bit more. Let's focus down to the swimming pools. We subsidize the swimming pools, where's Jerry? About $500,000 a year, and hopefully it's going to be a little bit less than that, but I mean, $500,000 a year is what we subsidize our pools for. And a lot of that are the outdoor pools, which are only open less than 90 days a year. Jerry, do you have the number for 2010, approximately what we subsidize the aquatics programs? About $500,000?
It's about $500,000.
And so, you know, it really is a philosophical decision of what you want to subsidize and what you don't. I will tell you, could we go out and raise the rates on swimming pools to hopefully get to the point where we're breaking even? The reality of we probably could, but then all of a sudden you're going to actually increase the cost of those kids going in there. And quite honestly, I'm not sure anybody wants to pick that battle. So, no, it's a tough decision. Another good example was what I tried to do in fiscal year 2011 was hold all subsidies level, just flat, including the doll, including the Journey, including everyone else. I just held them flat. And if you remember, we had the doll come in with needs. That was a philosophical decision that the council made, that they felt that the doll needed some additional resources. And, I agreed with that. That was fine. But there again, you almost have to take it on a case-by-case basis. There's no two subsidies that are identical in any community. So, sorry, I just burned up about 10 minutes of that, but I thought it was important to acknowledge, and you guys are exactly right. I mean, it's a philosophical question.
Back to Bonnie. What was your last question?
Well, I just trying to point out the inconsistencies about what's subsidized and what's not subsidized, because, it's easy to get thrown into a list. I would like to see the different the enterprise funds and all the city departments kind of work together to support each other. And I guess I would recommend right now that maybe we just instead of planning to cut any subsidies, is maybe again try to tell them to hold flat. I certainly don't want to see any huge cuts on anything with the mayor, with the good news that the mayor has brought, and so I guess I would want to wait on that till toward the end, closer to the end of the budget, to see where we're at. But I just think we've got to be careful about just saying we're going to cut all subsidies, because reality is almost everything we do is a subsidy. Thanks.
Procedurally, Mayor, when we go through these items here, we will vote on these, and then they will go to legal and finance for further discussion. Just if we can't really take action on these here. So if there was something we wanted to implement for 2011, that would have to go through legal and finance first. If
indeed you get to a point where collectively as a council you want to amend the 2011 budget, you would have to do it through a supplemental appropriation, whether you want to add or subtract. So yes, it would have to go through the formal process.
Further discussion regarding 5% cuts to subsidies. If no one has any other comments, I'm going to assume that we just move on to the next item. We're going to leave that as is.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion second to table. All in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed, that item is tabled. Next item is to cut the Journey $200,000. Okay, we have a motion and a second to table this item. No discussion on a tabling item. All in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed? No. Charlene, roll call.
Weifenbach.
to table $200,000 funding. No, it was a tabling motion. There was no discussion on the table motion. So, okay, so you're voting no.
So Weifenbach is no?
Well, we've already voted on now. Let's go through roll call here.
Davis? Kroger?
No.
Costello?
No.
Quaker? Wah?
Aye.
Brown? Mason? Peterson? Motion fails 4 to 5.
Okay, the motion fails. We're back to discussion cuts of the Journey Museum, $200,000. Jordan Mason.
Thank you. Originally, that was my motion during the first budget hearing that we had. I mentioned that we could look at, based on the percentage increase in their budget, looking at a subsequent decrease of the city subsidy based on their increase in endowment. And based on what they showed us, that was my motion. But I would like to actually give a little bit of background on why I presented that motion. Starting in November 29th of 2000, there was a museum task force structured by Mayor Jim Shaw. And some of the background that was included when they reported to the Legal and Finance Committee on that date was that the city had authorized the expenditure of $11 million for the construction of this, and that it came then with the museum task force, according to the meeting minutes, that it was their interest to pay for these costs for a 5-year period, which give a new board enough time to better establish the journey and build the necessary endowment to help it survive long term. Further, I also included this handout coming from our city council member, prior city council member, Babe Steinberg. And this letter reads, and if everyone would indulge me for a second, it states, Dear City Council Member Steinberg, this is a follow-up to a letter I recently sent you. The Museum Alliance of Rapid City Incorporated and the Journey will ask for no city funds for operations or maintenance upon opening. Sincerely signed, Sidney G. Goss, the executive director of the Museum Alliance at that time. The reason that I bring this up is this task force came to us in the year 2000. It's now 2011, and I guess back to the discussions about policy and philosophical discussions. Just as this museum task force stated that this is an investment on the part of the city and that it would be counterproductive to completely abandon it. However, I think given that the museum has come to the city and signed a written statement given to us that states very clearly what their position was, are we going to, I guess my question then becomes, are we going to let the agreement between the city and the Museum Alliance fail and let it go? Because clearly one side of the party here hasn't held up their end. So I think it's a fair question at this point, you know, almost now 6 years after the fact, to ask where are we at and what are we going to do as a city. With that, I'll let my colleagues speak.
Okay. Sam, did you have a comment?
Thank you, Mr. President. I see that Mr. Summers is here from the Journey. Is it appropriate to ask him a question?
Sure. Ray, you want to come up?
Ray, I'd like to preface my comments by saying I think you've done an admirable job in managing the Journey, and I think everyone recognizes that a museum, most museums are not completely self-funding, that some level of taxpayer subsidy is both accepted and expected. And so my question to you is this: could you give us an update on your plans for the endowment and finding ways to enhance the Journey's funding sources to possibly look at reducing that $325,000 subsidy down the line?
Sure. Well, I'll certainly answer that question. I just want to
reiterate or recap kind of what's happened to that $325,000. The first year that the museum was subsidized in 2001 at $125,000. In 2002, the museum was subsidized at $325,000, and that amount has remained static throughout all of those prevailing years, from 2002 until this budget has spent $325,000. In those years, of course, there has been an erosion of purchasing power. So in effect, the museum each year has tightened its belt, if you will, to make do with the resources available. If you look at the 2010 purchasing power as opposed to 2002, there's been erosion of that $325,000 subsidy by nearly $60,000, about $65,000. At the same time, the amount of funds necessary to maintain the building has steadily increased. So this past year, we anticipated about $143,000 of funding to be held back by the city to fund the building, when in fact it actually amounted to about $150,000. So the balance of that, which would come to the museum as operating subsidy or management fee or whatever you want to call it, has actually been reduced. Next year, we've already determined that the amount of funds necessary to fund the structure and the overhead of the building, as if it were an empty building, it will be $165,000. As far as our endowment is concerned, we currently have approximately $98,000 in an endowment that is right now, the policy of the board is basically reinvesting any earned revenue from that endowment. So the museum itself is not getting any operating revenue from the endowment. It's all being reinvested. In the past 6 months, the board has readdressed and emphasized again the need for financial sustainability. We hired a consultant in November to come in and present to us options for a development plan. At about the same time, back in mid-fall, we were awarded a Strengthening Communities Fund grant, which is federal money that's being administered by the Cheeseman Foundation. Of that grant, right for the course of this year through September, we will have the opportunity to partake in capacity building training through that grant. In addition to that, there's a subaward that we will be submitting a proposal to the Cheeseman Foundation over the course of the next 2 weeks. Within that subaward, one of the things that's being considered for that subaward is to hire a consultant to do feasibility studies, a feasibility study on a capital campaign. That determination hasn't been made yet. The executive committee of the board will be meeting in the next few days to discuss that. In addition, there hasn't been a firm decision as to what items would be included in that capital campaign. There are a number of capital campaigns ongoing in the community right now, and we need to be sure that it would make sense to endeavor such a campaign. So one of the first steps would be to actually conduct a feasibility study. And what they do is they look at the potential items on that capital campaign and then interview about 100 individuals in the community who would have an interest in that type of a campaign to get their feedback, and then come back to the board to let us know whether it makes sense to move forward with that type of capital campaign. It's something that is happening as we speak. Does that answer your question? Thank you very much. Any other questions?
Gary Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ray Gentile, on the sheet that Alderman Mason handed out, I was on the board of directors at the time that letter was sent. And Alderman Quaker is quite right that museums just aren't easy to fund, as you know.
Yes, sir.
Those of us that are on their board that time, we had behind-the-scenes deep disagreements about the consultants and the plan that's put forward. We had a unified front when we came out here and came to the council on that. But be very cautious and move very slowly when you deal with these consultants, and really do your homework.
Right.
Because museums are a special animal.
Yeah.
And you can get found that several was dropped off the board after that because we didn't agree with the decision that we were doing. I don't think come out. So good luck, but be very cautious.
I've lived with the legacy of those consultants for the last 9 years. I fully appreciate and understand the consequences of believing everything you have paid for. And the city did. They believed everything they paid for.
Yep.
We've talked to 2 separate consultants. One's local, and the other is has a different zip code. The bottom line is that, as Alderman Quaker indicated and Alderman Brown reemphasized, museums have a mix of probably about a third of the revenue comes from, anywhere from a quarter to a third of the revenue comes from public funding. Many fortunate museums actually have substantial endowments, but those endowments do not cash flow the entire operations, and the other third or so is earned revenue. And actually, that's about our mix right now. Over the past 9 years, our city funding percentage is about 32% overall. Our earned revenue is about the same. I have a update, and I don't want to take your extremely valuable time, but I did give you an update. The first side of the sheet is more focused on programs, and this back side kind of reiterates what I just said.
Thank you, Ray. Further discussion, Bonnie Peters.
Thank you. I'm serve on the Journey Museum Board, or liaison, I suppose, for that. And I know that since I've been going that they have doubled up their efforts. I almost feel like they should change their name because there's this dark cloud following or any name of the Journey Museum because, you know, the citizens were probably sold a bill of goods at the time. But the people that are there now working very hard, you know, weren't there at that time. And most, the best museums in the world are subsidized, and to some degree. And they're also qualifying for more grants, and they're also networking with other local groups, which they think is going to let them qualify to draw in other grants. So they are working at trying to be more solvent. And so anyway, like I said, I would like to let them be at the time for now while they're trying to make these efforts, especially when you consider that we're coming out of this bad economy. So it's been hard for anyone to make much headway during that time. Thanks.
Further discussion on this item? Jordan.
Thank you. And thank you, Mr. Summers, for coming forward and providing that information. Overall, I guess I just feel like as a council, I think it's fair that we finally take a stand and make a decision that we're either going to absolutely dedicate for a long-term commitment from the city, or we're going to look back to the past at what was originally agreed upon and try and stick to that. I'm really at a point that either or, I don't really care, but a decision should be made. Because as Ms. Alderwoman Peterson clearly stated, there is a bit of a dark cloud because it's kind of left hanging out there, and it's completely unresolved. There's a lot of documentation to say this was what originally was agreed upon, and that agreement seems to have fallen by the wayside. At this point, I guess I'm just asking, as a council and as a community, we make a decision. And that's, I guess, all I'm asking for is just a simple yes or no. We're either going to do this long term, or no, we're going to look at other options. Either or, let's make a decision. Thank you.
Further discussion? Steve Davis.
Thank you, Mr. President. You know, it's a very emotional subject, without a doubt. And I've tried to take a step back from this and just look at it from a very logical business standpoint. what do we have here? And very simply, we had bad information in the past, and history has told us that we've made incorrect decisions. But the fact is, we have a Journey Museum. So now to start saying let's do away with the funding source that may or may not keep it alive, that's really, I think, the size of this decision that we're dealing with. And I agree with what Alderman Mason is saying here, is that if we're going to make a longer commitment to it, then we need to identify that we are. The reality is, if we're not, I think part of this $200,000 cut discussion needs to be, what are you going to do? If we cut $200,000 from their budget, will they exist? Granted, I hope that they can continue to grow and to get their endowments and their fundraisers to fill in. But if we cut their budget by $200,000 next year, have we in fact signed a death warrant to the Journey? Don't know. That's the supposition that we tend to see around the table. If we have, then I guess we need to look at it from a standpoint of, have we served the citizens of Rapid by taking away the museum? That's one of the questions that I've had to wrestle with. Number two, we've got a huge building over there. What are you going to do with it? 2A is, what's it going to cost to have a big empty building sitting over there? $200,000 a year? I don't know. This question is a lot more than just cutting, because in fact cutting may cost us money. Not to mention the fact that the whole concept of the services that we're providing to the public would be done away with. So I'm not saying let's not cut money, although I hope we don't, because I personally, and my constituency is saying it's a service that they look forward to in the city of this size. But please, at least if we're going to look at this thing, let's look at it for the whole story, not just the face value of cutting money. Let's look at what the long range is going to be and what the whole repercussions. It's the decisions that were made in the past are having an impact on us today. Let's not use the same kind of incomplete information today and make equally incorrect decisions for the impact on the future. Thank you.
Further discussion, Sam Quaker.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to offer a motion to ask the Journey Museum, as part of the 2012 budget process, to submit an update on the endowment development and additional fundraising efforts.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Further discussion on that motion? Ron Whitebach.
Thank you, Mr. President. I think I've aligned myself along the whole lines that I've heard a lot of, both directions of whether you should cut a subsidy or not. It comes to policies and philosophical, I mentioned earlier. One of the things I do notice when I talk about councils in the past or councils in the future, obviously this letter represents the fact that at this point in time, when they brought this project forward, they said there was no underfunding. Anybody who believed this letter, I mean, we see it today with 2012 projects, and you have to keep in mind that realistically, and what people have to do to try to sell the project to you is sometimes to get a project off the ground. But at some point, listening to Mr. Jordan's timeline, and I was unaware of this, in 2001, the city council previous to us, whichever one that may be, whoever was on it at that time, funded $125,000 to the museum. In 2002, they went from $125,000 to $325,000. That was councils previous to us, and I was not privy to this information. I appreciate the homework being done to get us to this point, and at some point in some time, councils previous to us felt that this mission, the Journey's mission, was important to them. I do struggle with the fact that if you cut their budget $200,000, I understand, basically it goes away. So let's don't kid ourselves. If we do this, then we need to have a plan. I'm not so much worried about an empty building. I think you could either sell an empty building or you could give it away or whatever the case may be. But let's look at, I mean, and I agree if we have an update on some of these things, I don't know that it will change the picture because the fundraising on these museums, as I'm getting to understand, I haven't had the opportunity to sit on a museum board or anything like that. I'm not sure how. Yeah, I don't want to delve into that world, yeah. I have enough boards and meetings, but at some point, this is no different than any other subsidy outside of, making sure that we are not mixing enterprise funds and subsidies. There's a big difference. An enterprise fund will provide water, sewer, those types of things to the city. These are funds that somewhere along the line the city council has thought to bring this item to the community, as Mr. Davis had put it, to bring the item to the community, and there's going to be a cost to everybody, whether you use it or you don't use it. With this information, I would have to take some time to really relook at to see what the decisions are made. Going back to philosophically, why do we make these decisions? Why did someone before us make this decision to fund this journey at $325,000 from $125,000 in 2001 to $325,000 in 2002? Why did they make that decision? I'm not exactly sure, but maybe there could be some research done in that arena that I'm not sure.
Actually, I guess I could tell you, Ron, I was on the council at that point in time, and we had lengthy discussions, and we actually talked about all the things we've talked about tonight regarding the Journey Museum. And I guess, we've had this discussion many years, not just one, many years, and actually it's only been the last few where there really hasn't been a whole lot of discussion about the $325,000 that we've given them. So I would say, in the last 5 years, really the consensus is the city council has been comfortable of funding them $325,000 a year, not increasing it, but they're comfortable in supporting the Journey Museum at the $325,000. But like I said, this discussion has taken place many, many, many times over the years with, different council members. And, the bottom line is, if you cut them, they're going to go away. And then what happens? And, all we can do is continue to ask them to continue to beat the bush and try and take that dollar amount down from what we're subsidizing them. But, I guess that's where we've been at.
I appreciate that, Mr. Kroger. That's an honest position that, not being here when these things transpired, I'm not sure. I've heard a lot of, people who are unhappy with it. They probably don't use it, but yet they may use the swimming pool. Those types of things. We can make those types of arguments. We subsidize the YMCA's LaCroix Links in the tune of $40,000 for water, which I still have not figured out yet. I'm not a huge guy for these subsidies, but if we're going to cut it, I want to make sure that I'm right on with the philosophy that went behind putting it in place originally. So I appreciate you sharing that with me. So I wasn't here at the time, but thank you.
For Jordan Mason.
Thank you. I did just want to make a brief comment, and just in response. First, where I got the 200,000 figure, I think should be explained. During the first budget hearing, I said I would look at the percentage increase of their endowment, including grants, and deduct that. The next budget hearing meeting that we had, it showed an increase, and if memory serves me correctly, I haven't been able to find the exact meeting minutes yet, but it went from somewhere around 700,000 to 900,000. Obviously, that's a difference of about 200,000. So I stuck with exactly with what I said during the first budget hearing meeting, and that is where I came up with that figure. In response to some of the other things that have been said, I am also at a point that I could also be comfortable with the idea of supporting this. But I guess it comes back to what Alderman Kroger is saying. This has been something that has been a perpetually ongoing thing. So I guess I would look for one of my colleagues that if we are tonight going to make that agreement with ourselves and for the community, that this is going to be a long-term commitment. And keep in mind, this is a long-term commitment. Then let us do it. And I guess I'm looking for that. Let's finally take a stand on this and make a statement about where we're at as a city. Thank you.
Okay, Mayor Hanks.
Thank you. And I just want to follow up on what Mr. Mason said. Unfortunately, and I agree with what you said, as far as, make a decision, live it. The problem is any decision that is made only lasts as long as until you have new council members on this council. So although you try to establish a long-term policy, the reality of it is, in the structure that we operate, it's only as long as you have a majority of votes on the council still feels that way. But and quite honestly, that's the struggle that we always run into. There's changing attitudes, there's changing priorities based upon who's sitting on the council. But no, I agree with you.
Okay, the motion on the floor. Bill, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'd have to agree with Mayor Hanks. It is hard with the ebb and flow of councils. New ones come on, old ones leave. And I was on the council in 2001 when this discussion was really heated, and then it came up again a few years later. And so as the council changes, the journey year after year has continued to get the subsidy. And it would be nice to have a long-term commitment from the city to the Journey Museum, but keep it in mind the Journey Museum is the city's. I mean, it is our museum, and it's just part of that big pie that makes Rapid City a great place to live, whether it be recreation, the museum, the arts, the sports fields, everything that this city has to offer. So to make it a long term is not feasible, but every year when the budget this rolls around, it could change, and things can change at the Journey. Maybe they do get some major grants and some additional funding to their endowment. So this council person, as long as I'm on the council, and the Journey continues to prove that they're trying to move forward, I will continue to vote for the subsidy as it is today. Thank you.
Thank you, Bill. Gary Brown.
Yes, Mr. Summers. Make a statement to Mr. Summers. Ray, along with this motion, that's probably going to pass, and getting that information on grants and that back, one thing that we always hung our hats on when back in the 90s when we were trying to put this thing together was the acceptance in the community, how many community events you're getting in, what you're getting revenue from those, and a lot of that is just social feel-good, too. I know we get in there. But also your bus tours and things like that. I'd like to get a report, if you could, of how that has been going on, your gift shop sales, that type of thing, too, please.
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
Well,
that would be at the next budget.
And to answer the question about grants look great on your profit and loss statement, but grants by their very, very nature have to be for a specific project that the granting agency agrees with. So just because we get in the case of the current NASA grant, we have a $493,000 grant from NASA over 3 years. That's not necessarily going to be reflected in solvency in another area, because that grant is it was $88,000 for the dome, and then continuing salary for one person and partial salaries for the others. So grants are great as long as they fit your mission. And in the case of this grant and previous grants, we've made very, very sure that as we apply for these grants and write the proposals, that it fits our mission, that it's not something that, we're not straying off the reservation to take on some new area just because the money's there. So grants are great, and we will continue to pursue them. In fact, we currently have a National Science Foundation grant with a research associate that's a part of the museum. We get an indirect, 15% indirect from that. So that helps cover our costs. But the other $120,000, if it's approved, would go directly to that researcher.
Ron Weidenbach.
Thank you, Mr. President. I want to make sure that my position on this is clear. And up until tonight, I had no reservations cutting this funding to this project but part of the process of bringing forward this information from Mr. Mason's homework and those types of things, obviously always shed a new light on these things. There is a lot of constituents throughout the community who don't believe in this project, so let's make sure that we have that on the table, so understanding moving forward that there's two sides to this. I mean, there's not very many days that go by where people are telling me, hey, you should eliminate this from the funding sources, and it may be a lack of education, it may be something that they really truly believe in, there may be a lot of variables there, so understanding that, the philosophy and the missions are important to understand, and the community understands what the role is, so if it comes back around at some point, then I'll have that discussion again. But I appreciate Mr. Mason bringing it forward and actually doing a lot of homework to find out what happened here and what's going on and not getting his head cut off from being the messenger of something I'm sure he's heard in his ward several times. So, thank you.
Okay, the motion on the floor is to have the Journey Museum come back at the 2012 budget process and give the council an update, basically, is what it amounts to, on the endowments. Okay. Further discussion? Being none, all in favor, say aye. Aye. Those opposed? We're on to the next one. Cell phones. We need to take action on the item on the No, that went away with this. That was a substitute motion that you had, wasn't it, Sam? Okay. Right. Okay. Next item is cell phones. I would assume that is city employee cell phones. Pauline?
After the request from the council to look at our current contracts, Tracy did contact our Verizon representative, and she worked with him to get the best deal possible on the phones that we currently had. Tracy, can you remember how much that was going to end up saving us a year?
I think it was about $4,800 a month.
A month that it was going to save? Okay. So.
That was a savings of $4,800 a month. So it was an item well worth being brought forward. Do we want to take any other action on this item? Ron Whitebach.
Thank you, Mr. Kroger. I appreciate you guys going out to bid on these items, and $4,800 a month is less than $60,000 a year, but I appreciate that the council feels that's significant. So thank you.
So no action necessary on this one, I would assume. Just move to acknowledge. Okay, we have motion second to acknowledge. All in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed? Across the board cuts, I guess, is the next one. Bonnie.
I think I brought that up when we were looking at ways to cut that. I don't know, in my mind, it's just seems to make more sense that we distribute the pain evenly throughout all programs. So, like I would much rather cut, say, 1% from everybody than 200,000 from one group, generally speaking. And that's why I just had put it on there before. I don't know if anyone else had. Again, it's just a philosophy, because I would rather have my boss come in and say, Bonnie, you need to cut your program 1% or 5% than for my boss to come in and say, you've got to do this, or you can't have this money, you've got to, I would like to be able to let the supervisors and all decide how to deal with extra cuts instead of just, taking a position away, or I don't know, that's why I consider micromanaging, kind of telling them how to do their job. I think it's better to tell people they'll just have less money and they can figure out the best way to do with less. Thanks.
Further discussion on across-the-board cuts? Ron Whitebach.
Thank you, Mr. President. I guess I'm on a roll. I might as well continue to talk. I don't necessarily know that we need to
I was going to say, should we turn the timer on?
No, that's, across the board cuts to me would be like the same thing I had mentioned earlier. Philosophically, it would be, probably detrimental to just cut something across the board when typically you can, move things around. Technology changes, those same types of arguments can be made. And, looking at the items, looking at opportunities are different. I think we're fine with that. I guess we can move to acknowledge this or table it or something.
Okay, the motion on the floor is to basically table, to acknowledge. Okay, we have a motion and a second to acknowledge across-the-board cuts. All in favor say aye. Those opposed. Next item. Department directors will bring forward a 5% cut listed in priority order. Sam?
I think I still think it's worth going through this exercise to see what, not that we would necessarily implement these cuts, but it would help the council to understand as the policymakers, what the priorities are within the budget. And I know that there's been resistance to doing this in the past, but I think that this would be a worthwhile exercise, if not 5%, maybe even, look at a lesser percent. But I think to simply say, well, we think the numbers are coming back and we think we're going to be okay, I don't think that that's a good answer. I think asking the department directors to go through this exercise and bring forward a report to the council at the next budget process would be very, very useful, because it would be a great tool for us to understand where the priorities are of each department director. So I think this would be really a good idea to proceed with this in some fashion. Now, I'm not saying proceed with a cut, so I know people are probably gearing up to hit their microphones and attack me on this, but I don't want to be attacked on this. I'm asking that we simply look at what we would cut if we needed to cut, because we don't know for sure what this coming year will bring. So I think that, again, this is a worthwhile exercise to go through. Thank you.
Mayor Hanks first, then we'll go to...
Well, quite honestly, that's exactly what we did in 2011 when we approved the budget. The department heads were all asked to basically cut 5% from their budget, and that's the process we work through. I will tell you, we will go start with preparing the budget here within the next month or two, and my only concern is the fact that we're almost duplicating a process here, which we're going to be doing anyway. I mean, this is basically budget 101. You set your priorities, and based upon the revenue that you have available, and we're certainly going to look for any additional cuts that we can, but quite honestly, we're going to be going through this process anyway in the next 2 or 3 months, and you're going to actually have it within 4 months. By the 1st of July, you're going to actually have a budget, and we're going to work our way through the process. So,
further comments? I think Dave Davis was next, then Bonnie, and then you, Ron.
Thank you, Mr. President. I think I'm probably saying the same thing that Sam is in a different way, which, Sam, you can take your helmet off.
Thank you.
I think what we're all talking about is simply a contingency plan. We're not looking to cut the cuts, and as long as we've got that on the table, that having those ideas on the table of what we would do if the revenue isn't there, how we would approach that, I think is very healthy. I think some of the fear and why some people's necks swell a little bit is that when you start putting the idea, as it says here, is for the directors to bring forward a 5% cut. there's some assumption on their part, at least, that they're going to lose that budget money. And so I think if we approach that from the standpoint, as the mayor has said, it would be a duplication. So simply to bring us up to date as they're budgeting, what their contingency plan would be. If the tax revenue isn't there, how are you going to manage your department? You've got a budget based on where it is now, what we're projecting, but what happens if it isn't? Where are you going to deal with it? Are you going to deal with the operational costs? You're going to deal with the staffing. You know, and this brings an additional burden, not just on the department heads, but back on us. Because when those department heads bring the uncomfortable to us, we have to be willing to sit at this table and tap on the light just as quickly. So I think it's a very important thing, and I agree with Sam on it. I think you need to title it as a contingency plan so that the department heads don't have the fear that they too have to wear a helmet. Thank you.
Oh, I was just going to offer a friendly amendment to allow them more time to get this together, because I think when we have our next meeting isn't going to be enough.
Okay, we don't have a motion or anything on the floor or anything, so.
Oh, did Sam not make one? Oh, I thought it was a motion. Okay.
Ron, I'll go to Ron Whitebach.
Thank you, Mr. President. I agree too that, I mean, if it already is being done anyway, so there's really not that much of an issue to bring it forward to the council. We, in the end, have to sign our names to the final budget, and every year there's always a battle about how it all took place and where it all came from. And if we're moving forward with the approach that we're taking now, and if we think this is a sustainable approach for the future councils, I think it would be appropriate to be in on those have some sort of updates on those conversations. And also, I noted that, and I'm gonna take this from Mr. Kroger, because every year that I've been here, he says, well, that wasn't on your priority list last year. It was your priority list, and this year you're funding something different. So I think it's appropriate if we have those lists too, and not only is there room for cutting, but there's room for manipulation of their departments of what they may synergize or feel is more necessary and more important. I remember looking at reports going, okay, we're going to hire a new FTE, and on the top of the list may have been one department, and that never got done. And Alderman Kroger had on several occasions asked about that. So this will give us an opportunity to keep a better tab on it as we move forward and we move into that budgeting process, so we don't, what was the saying, have the train leave the station without us or something like that. So I'll be on that train. Thanks.
Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. President. The suggestion, and I think Dave brought up a very good point, is the fact that, looking at almost a contingency plan as part of the preparation of the budget, I think would be appropriate. And I'm with Bonnie. I would ask that the council give them the leeway to actually bring it in as part of the budgetary process. Like I say, you're going to see it in 4 months anyway. For them to go out and try and prioritize, and I don't want to use cuts because that's not fair, prioritize what they expend their money on in fiscal year 2012. Let's face it, we're still in January of 2011. Priorities may change, and I will tell you they typically do change in the coming 3 or 4 months before we actually get the budget together. So, no, I think it's a worthy exercise to basically talk about priorities within their budgets, not only goals but their priorities, and also formulate some kind of a contingency. Well, what if the revenues aren't there? What are your priorities? And we can do that as part of the budgetary process.
Further discussion? No motion. Gordon.
I guess I'll offer a motion, and also, if I may, offer a short explanation of why. I would offer a motion to actually have us go through that exercise. And just the reason why is because I think it would be a good way to, as the mayor clearly stated, is one, have the contingency in place in the event that we do have a shortfall. But number two, as the mayor has done actually already with certain departments, the ability to consolidate and improve and make certain areas more efficient by allowing this prioritization list of, what areas may be not as efficient or maximized or optimized as they could be, based on this priority list, I think would be a good move. So I will offer that motion.
Second.
Is there a time frame on this motion to have this brought forward?
Mr. President, I would have some real concerns of trying to do something in advance of trying to actually do the budget. I mean, like I said, I have no problems, and I would ask the motion maker if he could maybe insert some new language so it doesn't say coming back with 5% across the boards, but to prioritize and to identify contingencies in the event of budgetary shortfalls.
I will accept that friendly amendment.
And like I say, if there again, we're going to be starting the budgetary process here in the next couple months anyway. And I just, quite honestly, everyone right now is very busy, and there's no sense in duplicating it since we're going to be doing it anyway.
Is that all right with the
And
second?
everyone's going to, quite honestly, you'll all see it when the budget's proposed, presented, so.
Okay. So it'll just be brought through the normal budget process.
Yep, we'll make sure that it, in addition, when you are given the budgetary books, what we will do is we will write typically in the cover sheets, I'm thinking on the fly here, identify really what the priorities for fiscal year 2012 are, and also talk about, make a contingency statement in there that if revenues are short of projected revenue projections, what would be the top priorities? I mean, we'll figure something out in there. So it'll actually become part of that document.
Okay. Any discussion on the motion then on the floor? Seeing none, all in favor say aye. Those opposed? Next item. Energy costs. Noah.
Thank you, Mr. President. If my memory serves me right, I put this on the agenda, and it really goes back to simple budgeting 101, and as the mayor alluded to, they will be starting the budgeting process, but I just want to remind the mayor and the department directors, which they probably don't need to be reminded of, but when we start setting the budget numbers for 2012, and with energy being a major cost factor in our budget, to really look at what electricity, natural gas, gasoline, how it ended up 2010 actuals to 2011. I mean, it is budgeting 101, but we can, based on what we know right now, natural gas is fairly flat, if not declining somewhat. Electricity took their big hike last year. Gasoline, we know, will be going up. All the experts are saying we could see $4 a gallon gas by this summer. So it's just a reminder. I don't think there needs to be any sort of motion. I think our department heads and the mayor know enough about city budgeting to realize that they need to look at our energy costs closely when they start the 2012 budget process. Thank you.
Ron Whitelock.
Thank you, Mr. Kramer. I believe something came up with the doll on this that we had to, because the energy cost increased, maybe the mayor would know that. So, I mean, going into 2011, are we going to sit at the end of 2011 and look at the same item, I guess?
Mr. President, what happened at the doll was the fact that in the 2010 numbers, we were really making just flat projections because with the expansion of the doll, we really didn't know we didn't have a track record of what their utilities were going to be. Most of the rest of the departments, it's pretty easy. You can take a look at the trends, and we're usually very close. With the doll, with literally doubling the square footage of their facility, it was sort of a swag as far as plugging those numbers in. But going forward in 2012, we actually have the actual numbers from 2010 to drive those. So we should be in pretty good shape going into 12 as far as those projections.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
So, Bill, you had a motion to just acknowledge?
Yes, that would be fine.
Okay, we have a motion and a second to acknowledge. Bonnie?
Okay. One other comment, or I would encourage this, the department heads to be looking at policies, procedures for either using motion lights or turning lights off, any way that it can be built in easily to reduce those kind of expenditures. We have to retrain ourselves. You know, we don't need a light on in the bathroom when there's no one in there. And, or sometimes you come by and lights might be on this building, and makes you wonder what's going on in there late at night, or why there's so many lights on. So, anyway, just to look at those. Thanks.
Okay, Bill Wah.
Thank you again, Mr. President. Just to tag on to what Bonnie has said, the city does have an energy policy, and those sort of items are in the energy policy. And I know that was brought forward a few years ago and kind of reissued to the department heads, and the energy committee that I sit on has reviewed that current energy policy and find it to be current today as it was a number of years ago when it was brought forward. And in future budget meetings down on the list, we will have some discussion on facility energy position, and I will talk more on that when we get to that point. But I think our department heads and the folks that work in the city realize we have an energy policy, and it might not be followed all the time, but the department heads know that it's there and that it should be followed, and hopefully the more we bring it up and talk about it, the more they look at that policy and move forward by following what it tells them to do in that policy. Thank you.
Thank you, Bill. Motion on the floor is to acknowledge. All in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed? Aaron Costello.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to draw attention to the fact that it's 7:28. Our meeting is scheduled to adjourn by 7:30, and we still have items 3 and 4 that need at least a short discussion. So would a motion be in order to proceed to agenda item 3?
I don't think we need a motion for that. We basically said when we started these that we were going to shut her off at 7:30. So let's move quickly to item number 3, which is protocol for adding items to the budget discussion item list. I guess I open it up for discussion. Are we going to allow more items to be put on as we work our way through? I have no problem with that, but they would just be added on to the end of the list.
I would make a motion to, if someone had an item to add on to the list, they would send an email to Alderman Kroger, Alderman Costello, have it added to the next week.
Second.
Can we remove items?
You know, why we...
If we put it on?
Yeah, I know you'd send an email, Bonnie, regards to items that I think it'd be just easy to basically table them when we get to them, than have a motion to take them. I mean, it doesn't matter to me. But
If I may, Mr.
Go ahead,
President. And Bonnie, I side with Ron with that for the reason of I may put something on here and later decide, oh, that's silly, I don't want it on there, but somebody else may have come up with some very pertinent idea along those lines. So, thank you.
Okay, so the motion on the floor is to have anyone who wants to add an item on to the next budget hearing meeting to contact Aaron or I, and we'll put that on. But it will be added to the bottom of the list or category, whatever it may be. Okay. All in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed? Motion passed. Were you going to talk about item 4, Aaron, or?
Yeah, just shortly. As it says, the suggested date is the 4th Monday of each month, and although that conflicts with the West Boulevard Neighborhood Association meeting, I'll be okay with just setting these budget meetings to be the 4th Monday of each month.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion, the second, to schedule all the budget meetings to the 4th Monday of each month. Discussion of that motion. Dave Davis.
Thank you, Mr. President. I agree with having the meetings. I I guess I just have a question, the purpose for the meeting and when we'll know when we've completed that purpose. Because to have a perpetual meeting is not at the top of my list, but, you know, if we know that we've gone through all the budget items, will we stop having those meetings? Is that the intent of the motion maker?
Yes, that's the intent.
I'm fine with it, thank you.
Oh, shoot, I kind of like the motion on the floor. That way I knew where I was going to be every Monday. Okay, the motion on the floor is budget meetings will be the fourth Monday of each month, starting at 5:30 to 7:30. Further discussion on that motion? Being none, all in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed, motion carries. We're meeting motion to adjourn.
Move to adjourn.
Motion and second adjourn, all in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed, meeting's adjourned.
Just out of curiosity, Mr. Kroger, last night, did we already go through